Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by Adam Pfeifer of FTN Fantasy, and we've got a Superflex startup mock draft for you. Get excited. Adam, thank you for being here again. Is this your third time on the show, second time on the show? You've been here before.
Yeah, I think it's at least 3 or 4, and always happy to join. Really tough kind of time for Dynasty. Obviously, it's starting to ramp up now that we have training camps kicking off, but I'm looking through like 4 of my 5 Dynasty leagues like the past 2 weeks, and just nothing's happening. I messaged the group, and I was like, can we get a trade, something? Like, we need something, but luckily, we're getting close, so.
Yeah, well, I think, and part of that for you especially, and for me, is that we exist within the bubble of content creators in this space. And even those of us who produce as much Dynasty content as possible still get sucked more into the redraft world right about now, the time that training camps start, which is kind of a shame because this is a great time for Dynasty, in my opinion. We've got all these rookies getting into training camps. We got the guys on new teams. Like, we've got some opportunities for some real shifts in value, and not just real shifts in value, but some fake shifts in value that you can profit off of. Like, I think one of the great examples is the running back situation in Denver. We hear over and over and over again, and Javonte Williams might get cut. Jaleel McLaughlin at 175 pounds is going to be the lead running back. I want to start here. We're going to jump into the mock draft and just do that almost entirely. But I don't provide a very unbiased opinion on that Broncos situation. What is your take on all of this? Have we actually heard any real news all summer?
I lean towards no. The only thing that kind of has me a little bit with my eyebrow raised with the Javonte Williams stuff is that, like, he's really the only running back that Sean Payton really hasn't, like, brought in, right? Like, everybody else he brought in, essentially. But like, I still struggle to believe that team is deep enough. Like, unless Audric Estime in camp and preseason is just like unbelievable, I would be pretty surprised if Javonte got cut. But like, if he's even remotely on the roster bubble, why not try to trade him to Dallas or somebody first before cutting him?
Right. And I think, like, if it was someone other than Sean Payton and the way that Sean Payton has kind of behaved the last 18 months, then I probably wouldn't believe it at all. I don't believe that Samaje Perine or Audric Estime or Jaleel McLaughlin are actually better starting running backs than Javonte Williams, but I'm not sure that's exactly what matters. I think what you hit on there is probably the biggest part of the risk. Now, we are doing a Superflex, full PPR mock draft, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 regular flex. I started the draft off with the first pick because I'm trying to host a podcast and I need to pick on the corners. I took Patrick Mahomes. He is my QB1 in both redraft and Dynasty. That makes Adam upset because he's the world's biggest Josh Allen fan. Josh Allen went second, followed by, and this is interesting, CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks off the board to start the draft. Adam's going to be coming back up here in just a second, and not necessarily in the order you would expect. I will say that all of our drafts, almost all of them, are 6 points per pass touchdown. So that elevates Stroud just a little bit. I think it's fair to wonder if Stroud's got maybe an extra 5 years of runway in terms of dynasty value over Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. But in terms of 2024 projection, man, there might be a 5-point per game difference between the 2 guys that went behind Stroud. And so, Adam, I think when people go young early in the draft, or the opposite, I often think, okay, well, the rest of their draft should kind of be influenced by that. Like, if you want obviously to win now in the first couple of rounds, then don't be taking rookies that we don't think you're going to play very much this year in round 5 and 6 just because they're young. Does Stroud that early influence the rest of your team, or is it going to take a couple picks before you decide what you're doing there?
I feel like that's kind of my thought process in most startups. Like, I need at least 2-3 selections to really know the direction my team's going. And yeah, I was a little bit surprised Stroud went third, just because, like, there's been this like talking point this offseason of like, okay, like he's amazing after his rookie season, but like in Dynasty, is he somewhat overvalued now? Because like I don't think he should be going ahead of Lamar or Richardson probably. Not that he's shouldn't belong in that tier. It's just like you mentioned, like if he's not giving you the rushing production, he could be like on a per game basis a handful of points worse than those guys. So I was a little bit surprised, but at the end of the day, like it clearly is a sign that he's going to be towards the top for the next 10 plus years, most likely.
So I do like this draft room, a bunch of pros. We show up and like 5 minutes into the draft, we're almost 2 rounds in.
Yeah.
Nobody misses their first pick. So as you're watching the draft board on YouTube, we're going to be a little bit behind that, recapping the picks for the podcast. You can kind of get the best of both worlds when you're watching on YouTube, I feel like, but I don't want to be confusing you guys. I'm going to go through round 1 here. And another observation I've got, Adam: Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud. Then Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson. Jamar Chase goes as wide receiver 1, followed immediately by CeeDee Lamb. Then Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, and Justin Jefferson. So really 2 things there: Chase, Lamb, Jefferson as the wide receiver order, and no Bijan or Brees in the first 12 picks. What are your thoughts on those 2 things?
So I am really high on Jamar Chase. Like I don't have a problem with him being the first receiver in Dynasty. Like if you're talking redraft for 2024, he's actually my wide receiver 1. And then there's obviously the stuff we got with his contract. They'll get it done. But if you look at Jamar Chase, last year was a weird season because Joe Burrow had the calf coming into the season, and their offense was completely it was just held back. Like there was 0 play action. His play action rate dropped by like 5% in the first handful of weeks when his calf was a problem, and he was getting the ball out faster than any quarterback outside of Tua. And then he got healthy. It was the week 5 game against Arizona. Jamar Chase went crazy. He had like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. And from weeks 5 to 10, Jamar Chase averaged like over 100 receiving yards, 8 catches, 10 plus targets, and he was at 23 fantasy points per game, which was right where CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill were for the season. So if you're telling me Chase is healthy and Burrow's healthy, which the latter has definitely been a concern, I think that's one of the reasons, on top of him being an elite talent, is why I have him as my wide receiver 1 for this season. And if you're projecting it for Dynasty and you want him paired with Joe Burrow for the next handful of years, there's question marks with Dak's longevity in Dallas, and obviously Justin Jefferson has quarterback question marks all of a sudden now in Minnesota. I have no problem with Chase at wide receiver 1.
I'm going to do something that everyone's going to hate, because isn't that what I generally do in these drafts? I just can't not. So what happened was I talked about no Brees Hall and no Bijan Robinson in the first round. And then no Brees Hall, no Bijan Robinson in the top 20 picks. So we get to the end of round 2, and I'll recap round 2 in just a moment. We get to the end of round 2, and I've got Patrick Mahomes, and there's like 3, 6, 8 wide receivers off the board, and Bijan's still there. That was the easy pick for me.
Yeah.
But very easy pick. What I did after that, I had no idea. My top ranked wide receiver was Tyreek Hill, but if I'm going to take a 30-year-old wide receiver, then why wouldn't I just take Christian McCaffrey?
Yeah, definitely. If we were playing this league out, I would not want to play your team.
So I start off the draft with Patrick Mahomes, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey. Good luck doing that in real life.
I do have one. My main Dynasty team has those 2 running backs, and it is absolutely a blast.
Yes, it's lots of fun. Now, listen, I got burned last year in the offseason, and we did the draft live on this YouTube show. Some of you probably remember it. And I drafted almost everybody that got hurt last year. And after the draft, Adam Pfeifer was really mad because I already had like I was going to win it this year. I ended up with the 3rd pick this year. So things can go wrong when you draft to win now. How much, if you start with Mahomes, Bijan, and McCaffrey in a Superflex league, how much are you leaning into win now?
So I would say like 90% at that point.
So we're going to draft older wide receivers. We might be looking at Travis Kelce when we come back around. Like, let's just go win the league.
Yeah.
For now, let's recap round 2, and I want to get your thoughts on the guys that were taken ahead of Bijan. So Amon-Ra St. Brown goes with the 13th pick. Great pick. I love that. Then Dak. Then you took Caleb Williams. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes. Justin Herbert. Jaden Daniels. Garrett Wilson. Trevor Lawrence. A.J. Brown. then Brees Hall, Puka Nakua, and Bijan Robinson. Almost all wide receivers and quarterbacks there in round 2. You took Caleb with the 15th pick. With your first pick, you took Kyler Murray. Love that start in terms of quarterbacks. Definitely have what I think is a QB1 for this year and a QB2 for this year. So I think taking the younger quarterback who's probably going to be in a couple of years, not necessarily influencing your direction as to whether you're playing for this year or not. You got all options still open, right?
Yeah, and I debated between Caleb and Herbert, but with what that offense could look like, I'm not sold that they'll be as run heavy as everybody else thinks, because you look at the Greg Roman offenses in the past and the Jim Harbaugh teams in the past, they had the personnel to be as run heavy as they were. They had great actual run games and great defenses. That's not really the case with the Chargers. And like, they're playing the Chiefs twice a year. They're playing some high-powered AFC teams. What if they're down 17-3 in the second quarter? Like, but at the end of the day, if I have Herbert and Caleb for this season, both as like quarterback 2 options, why not take the guy that's younger? And the offense, I think, probably going to be better. So I was actually pretty surprised to get Caleb where I got him in a Superflex Dynasty startup. I mean, you know, the early second round on the way back after getting Kyler, I was pretty happy to do that.
And you are on the clock in round 3 with those 2 quarterbacks, basically every position but quarterback open. And again, we just continue to see the running backs get
and that's what I was going to mention when like Brees and Bijan fell. We have a lot of really smart people in this room, and I wonder if everybody's kind of mindset is running backs shouldn't be valued as highly in Dynasty, because all of a sudden that 2-year window could become. I mean, look at Dameon Pierce, look at some of these guys. So I wonder if that was part of it. But also at the same time, we're talking about the elite of the elite. I mean, Gibbs went early to mid 3rd round in this draft.
Well, you passed on Jonathan Taylor to take Devontae Smith.
Yeah.
And now we see Devontae Smith go at the 3-4 turn, or Jonathan Taylor go at the 3-4 turn. So 4 running backs taken in the first 3 rounds of this draft. I think it kind of feels like what we do with quarterbacks in analyst drafts in redraft. Like, people get in these drafts and they think, well, I know nobody's going to take a quarterback, so I can just wait and wait and wait. And it's not going to cost me anything, because there will be a great quarterback available in round 10. There's going to be great running backs in this draft now available in round 9 or round 10. And so people just keep passing on them and try to make the guy like me, who starts off with Patrick Mahomes, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey, feel dumb about it. Let's take a look at what happened in round 3 in this draft. Christian McCaffrey goes first, taken by me, then Brock Purdy, Tyreek Hill, Jared Goff. And like that, it's Superflex and it's Dynasty, but that combination of 4 players is still pretty hilarious. Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, Tyreek Hill, Jared Goff, then Jahmyr Gibbs, then Tua, Malik Neighbors to Adam Azer with the 31st pick. Jacob Gibbs takes Drake London. Kind of surprised he fell that far.
Yeah, I was hoping he made it back to me.
Nico Collins, Devontae Smith, and Sam Laporta and Trey McBride go back-to-back at the end of the 3rd round, right about where I have them in Dynasty. I think that's a good spot. Do you have a strong take on Laporta versus McBride this year in Dynasty, or you just think it's really close?
Yeah, I think it's like there's obviously pros for both. I do think Laporta's touchdowns will come down, but for me, it's like it really comes down to personal preference. I would lean towards Laporta just because that offense has been as good as it gets. There's so much continuity with that offense, but you really can't go wrong, I don't think.
Now, we're going to get into one of these situations for me when it gets to my pick, and I want to ask you kind of how you handle it. So, like, you could say you read the draft room wrong, or just that you have, like, maybe the top 2 running backs in the league and the top quarterback in the league this year, and you're okay with it. But you get to the 3-4 turn, and your top 4 or 5 players on your board are a position that you have kind of already satisfied. Do you just ignore that, or you just keep, like, it's a dynasty league? I'm going to stockpile value. Somebody's going to need these guys, and we'll figure it out when the season starts. You're not drafting your starting lineup today, in other words.
Exactly. That's how I view it as well. Like, I'm not just going to go, okay, quarterback's done, running back's done, wide receiver's done, I have to draft a tight end here, for instance. It really just comes down to players that, like, for instance, like, even if I didn't want to go the running back approach where you were, let's say, there's
Mhm.
no way I was going to pass on Bijan Robinson, for instance. So really comes down to value. And yeah, like you mentioned, like Dynasty, you have to also look at it with the lens of what could this player be worth down the line if somebody needed to acquire somebody. It's not the same as redraft where, yes, you shouldn't ever really draft to trade in mind, but if you are going to do it more so, it should be in a Dynasty format.
So we are waiting on Matt Donnelly with the next to last pick of round 4, and I'm just like, my second pick is going to be a very difficult decision. I'm hoping he doesn't also make my first pick a difficult decision, because there is, in terms of the positions that are still available, I feel okay about at least one of them, and I'll make that pick. I made the joke about, well, I guess I take Travis Kelce at the end of round 4. Well, in Dynasty, you don't if Mark Andrews is still there,
Yeah.
and he's 7 years younger. So I will take Mark Andrews at the end
It
of
just
round 4.
sounds so insane, by the way, to say that out loud. 7 years younger. Like you wouldn't, like, Kelsey's relatively older, but 7 just sounds insane.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've got Mahomes, Bijan, McCaffrey, and Mark Andrews. Haven't had to make the difficult decision about doubling or tripling up on the running back quite yet. I think at this point you go get the wide receiver who you think could be a young wide receiver 1 still. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a reach. This always happens during mocks. It doesn't generally happen to me until we get to like round 8 or round 9, but we get to the point to where I can't keep track of both the draft
Yeah.
and the breaks like I'm supposed to do right now. So we'll take a short break, and then I will make my pick.
You hear that? It's the steady pulse of the world's game that's turning fans into family and sports into passion. You hear that? It's the heartbeat of American soccer. The USL on CBS Sports Network.
So I made the big swing pick that, what you do is you make 4 picks in a row, and you're like, man, how do I have an elite tight end, an elite quarterback, and 2 of the best running backs in the game? I've got a little bit of room here to just make a swing pick on one of my guys. And George Pickens, obviously one of my guys for this season. He is now also my wide receiver 1. And I'm not even entirely sure that we're going to get to the end of this year and people are going to say, well, you didn't have a wide receiver 1. I think I might. I'm very excited about what he's going to do this season with the quarterback upgrade, with what I would say is the offensive coordinator upgrade. What are you feeling about the Steelers offense and Pickens in particular?
Yeah, I think he's super interesting because you obviously have that 4-game sample where Deontay was out, where he was like, awesome. The target share, target per out run rates were fantastic. I think it's so interesting the offense he's in and the quarterbacks he's going to be playing with, because Arthur Smith's scheme has always been passes over the middle of the field and obviously running the football 57 times. And then Russell Wilson and Justin Fields have always been hold on to the football, throw the football down the field and the sidelines. That changed with Russ last year in Sean Payton's scheme. So I think it's so interesting. But stylistically, I think Pickens is an awesome pairing with whoever's under center for the Steelers. And obviously we saw a little bit once Matt Canada was gone. Because remember when Matt Canada was there, it was literally like 30% of the time George Pickens was running a go route. Maybe he makes an awesome contested catch. It was still more go routes than you'd like to see, but it went down a little bit once they moved on from Canada. And now I hopefully will expect to see a lot more diversity in the routes he runs. So I'm pretty excited about George Pickens. I don't even think that's that much of a reach. A, because it's Dynasty. B, because you're on the turn anyway. You're not going to be up for a long time. So I don't even view that as a reach, to be honest.
I love you making me feel better about my team. Let's take a look at round 4, and then we'll take a look at your team after you make a couple of picks here. So we had Jonathan Taylor go off the board at the first pick of round 4, followed by Chris Olave, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane. That's really surprising to me too. We need to talk about you taking Barkley over Achane. Jalen Waddle, Deshaun Watson, Brandon Ayuk, Travis Etienne, Michael Pittman, Kyron Williams, DJ Moore, and then I took Mark Andrews. So Taylor, Olave, Barkley, Achane, Waddle, Watson, Ayuk, Etienne, Pittman, Kyron, DJ Moore, and Mark Andrews. Was the Barkley over Achane pick a inflection point where you decided, okay, we're playing for now?
It was A, partially that. B, like you mentioned all the time, doing these drafts while doing the show is a lot more difficult, and I actually thought Achane was gone, so that was a little bit of a misstep by me. But I'm fine with Barkley. The reason I took Devonta Smith too before that was because I saw Barkley was there. I actually thought Taylor was there too. Well, yeah, Taylor was there. So I knew I would probably get one of the two, and I have viewed
Right.
Taylor and Barkley relatively similar tiers. And man, I'm telling you, the more I do work and analysis on Devonta Smith, the more excited I am about him.
I think it's really interesting who's going to play what role in the Kellen Moore offense, because there is a chance that Kellen Moore's like, first off, I think there's a chance we're sleeping on how much Jalen Hurts is going to throw this year. And that he still has the tush push and the 1 yard touchdown runs, but he also throws for 4,500 yards. And both Smith and Brown are just awesome again. But I think there's a chance he really unlocks Devontae Smith, and he is just viewed as a consensus top 12 dynasty wide receiver like 4 weeks into the season.
Yeah, so I took him over Chris Olave, which I normally don't do because I do like Olave. But like you look at the Eagles last year, they were dead last in pre-snap motion. They just didn't run it. Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown in particular, according to FTN data, they were like, Devonta Smith was in pre-snap motion like 3% of the time. Like it was literally just go make plays down the field. Hopefully it works out. If it doesn't, well, we're screwed. And that's what you saw in the second half of the season when their offense just completely stalled. I don't think it's going to be to the same level of Keenan Allen, who was like 30% pre-snap motion almost. But if he's getting more of those layup touches and more usage from the slot, because he's only been in the slot like 30% of the time for his career, maybe slightly less. I'm not saying he's going to outscore A.J. Brown, but if he gets that role, I think it could be a lot closer than people think. And he's still super young. He's been really good in a role that's been a little bit inconsistent for fantasy. If we get more scheme touches from him, I think Devonta Smith could be unbelievable in this offense. And we know the pace is going to be massive with Kellen Moore too.
So we saw a pretty big gap here in the quarterbacks. We had just a ton of them taken in the first 2 rounds, 3 of them in round 3, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, and Tua. Just 1 in round 4. I mentioned Deshaun Watson. Just 1 in round 5, Drake May. And so far in the first half of round 6, just 1, JJ McCarthy. And I think that makes sense. I think that one of the biggest mistakes people make in Superflex drafts, both redraft and dynasty, is they miss the good starting quarterbacks. And then they just start to like, I got to get a quarterback. And so they reach. We often see this 2 or 3 or 4 round gap where there's not very many quarterbacks taken. I guess I'll ask you from my perspective, or a team that ends up in my position. At what point do you generally think like, okay, the Aaron Rodgers, the Kirk Cousins, the Matthew Stafford, whatever older quarterbacks you like, at what point do we feel comfortable with taking those off the board? Are we getting close to that? Travis Kelce was just taken.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty great value there, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, are we getting close to that point? Or is the difference with Kelce is that we think, well, he's old, he's at least elite this year. Those other guys are old and probably just kind of mid.
Yeah. And I mean, Kelce, like, obviously first of all, his regular season was still pretty good. It's just we're so spoiled by Travis Kelce. And then the playoffs, he was Travis Kelce again. For me, with like the Staffords, Cousins, Rodgers, I'm only okay with that tier as my second quarterback if I have one of the top 3 dynasty quarterbacks. Like there's a couple teams where I have Josh Allen and like Derek Carr, Stafford on my second quarterback, and the rest of my team is really good. So I think it's okay. But like I would be very uneasy if they were my second quarterback and my first quarterback was like in the, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff tier. I just don't think that's ideal. But this is probably the range. Like if you told me Stafford was playing like 3 more seasons, I would love Stafford because the Rams offense, when Stafford, Kyron Williams, Kupp, and Puka were all healthy, was like second in they were pretty much the second best offense from advanced analytics standpoint in the league behind San Francisco. Like they were elite. The problem is this could legitimately be Stafford's last year. We don't know. So there's still interesting players there. Like Russell Wilson was quietly pretty good in fantasy last year, but a new offense. I mean, I'm very high on Bryce Young.
Right.
But again, what's his ceiling for fantasy? Like if everything we want to see from Dave Canales and everything works out, what's their ceiling as an offense? Like the 16th best offense in the NFL?
So this is not best ball, but I took Mike Evans here, and that was it seems like every round,
1010.
every round I have one easy pick, And then I get the second one just feels like a complete disaster. The Evans pick for me, borderline top 12 wide receiver, kind of like closer to me to the Kelsey age than the Rodgers age, because I think Evans is going to be awesome. He just might only have a couple years left. I'm not sure if Rodgers is going to be good. And I don't generally think about stacking in redraft or dynasty very much, but Baker's the guy that might start 3 more years. And I just drafted Mike Evans, so I'm going to go ahead and take Baker Mayfield alongside him. So that will, through, what is it now, 7 rounds, my quarterbacks are Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield. My running backs are Bijan Robinson and Christian McCaffrey. My wide receivers are Mike Evans and George Pickens. Seems like I have a type there. And my tight end is Mark Andrews. How do you feel about that start?
Yeah, like, and there goes Bryce Young. Like Mayfield as your second quarterback on a team that has Mahomes, I have no problem. I think it's perfectly fine. I do think stacking a dynasty is a little bit more advantageous than redraft. So I do like the fact that you stacked. And yeah, I mean, like Evans and George Pickens are like, you're getting 1,000 from Evans and 8 to 10 touchdowns. I'm as high, at least as high on Pickens as you seem to be. So I like the team. That obviously the running backs are, nobody's going to rival the running backs that you have. So
it's a fun start, if nothing else. Let's take a look at what happened. We're going to rewind the clock, go back to round 5, where I did start the round off with George Pickens. Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts go right after that. Now, if you'll remember, right before I took Pickens, I took Mark Andrews. So Andrews, Kincaid, Pitts, kind of almost back to back to back. Then we get another wide receiver run, Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf, Rome Odunze, Drake May, the only quarterback taken in round 5 of this mock draft. Then Jonathan Brooks, T. Higgins. You took Tank Dell, and like as soon as I took Pickens, I put Tank Dell in my queue, and I almost just wish I'd taken Pickens and Dell there. And then Devontae Adams and Rashad White. So again, Pickens, Kincaid, and Pitts, Flowers, Metcalf, and Odunze, May, Brooks, and Higgins, and then Dell, Adams, and White. I did a social video yesterday on Tank Dell, and I really don't think it's that outlandish to believe that he could be the wide receiver 1 for the Houston Texans this year. Like, you look at what he and Nico did when they were on the field together last year, and it was very, very similar in terms of actual production. And one of them was a first-year wide receiver. One of them was a third-year wide receiver. So I don't have a hard time believing that Dell could be number 1. It's just how much is Stephon Diggs going to matter in that receiver room? Adam is getting ready to make a pick, and that's why I am talking so much. I want to take a look at Adam's team here as he is on the clock in round 7. A little different approach than I have taken. He has 2 quarterbacks, Kyler Murray and Caleb Williams. He has 2 running backs, Saquon Barkley and James Cook, one of my favorite breakout players for this season.
Yeah, I can't talk about him too much because I'll be accused of being biased, but right. I love him so much.
You are biased.
It's true.
2 wide receivers starting, Devontae Smith and Tank Dell. And so you decide to just kind of triple down on wide receiver with Terry McLaurin. Now, I try not to do too much table talk during the draft, but that's kind of what we're doing right now, right? So you don't have a tight end. We saw in the prior round, Pitts and Kincaid were taken. I took Mark Andrews. Are we kind of past the point of you being interested in a tight end this early in the draft now? Are we waiting the double-digit rounds?
So because it's Dynasty, like I have been entertaining the idea of TJ Hawkinson here, just because like, okay, like it doesn't really fit. If I'm going for it, like he's such a tough player in Dynasty if you are somewhat going for it, because he's going to miss some time. But when he's back, he's going to be what, tight end 3?
Right.
Like, so I am up now. I'm kind of debating it. It just does leave me with a bit of a tough spot to come all the way back, and I do think he'll be gone if I wait for him. And I was actually, Derrick Henry goes like right after me. I was kind of debating taking him here. This is kind of the round in a dynasty startup where if you are okay with it, this is probably where you should start to consider him. I'm kind of stuck right now because I was also looking at Will Levis as my 3rd quarterback. He goes off the board. I think I can wait there. I do love Chris Godwin. I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson.
He's agonizing, and I think Hawkinson is the right pick.
Yeah.
There are going to be some starting tight ends available in the double-digit rounds. that you can plug in for the first half of the season.
100%.
And you having TJ, and besides, look at my team. You're not competing this year anyway.
It's a very fair point. Like, I do love my team. I will say though, like Hawkinson, this is like you could make the case he could have went 7th round. Like obviously, it depends if the Titans get pushed back because I don't think he should be going in the same tier as Kincaid and some of those guys. But like since he joined Minnesota, he's been like his like rates and everything have been right behind Kelsey, and that's it. Like he's been that good.
I think it's going to be so interesting to see like who plays quarterback for Minnesota this season and for how long, and how the passing production, like, do they just stick with YOLO? We're going to throw the ball 40 times a game. We don't care who our quarterback is. Or do we see them pull back a little bit? Like signing Aaron Jones doesn't really make me think they're going to pull back. It just makes me think they'll throw to the running back a little bit as well.
I fully trust Kevin O'Connell too. I am all aboard with him as a play caller, as a head coach. And I think their concepts for their offense are helpful to whoever's at quarterback. So I don't know if they throw quite as much as last year, but I don't think there's going to be this shift, like this massive shift.
So I'm 3 picks away here, and Johnny Lazar, who's been helping me out over the summer, is in this draft. He took Cooper Kupp at pick 92. Johnny, if you're listening, I'm not very pleased with you right now. I was definitely planning on taking Cooper Kupp. It's going to take me a while to recover from that pick. I'm going to read to you round 6, Adam, and you just tell me like what sticks out. So Deebo Samuel, Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, JJ McCarthy, Brock Bowers, Kenneth Walker, Lad McConkey, Josh Jacobs, Travis Kelce, Kirk Cousins, Trey Benson, Mike Evans. I took. What stands out from that round? And if nothing, talk about the difference in draft between Kincaid, Pitts, and Bowers, which was over a round.
Yeah, so what, Bowers went around after those guys?
Yep.
It's so tough because like if he as a prospect, not quite Pitts level, but definitely better than Kincaid as a prospect. If he went almost anywhere else, not almost anywhere, but like eventually like we just think talent will win out. I am not the largest Luke Getsy fan,
right?
But like a round difference is interesting in Dynasty. I will say that because like Devontae Adams is 31, Myers is 28. They just need the full-time answer at quarterback. I think it's interesting. I think we could be looking back on this a year from now and say, wow, like you got Bowers around after the other tight ends. Like that's just winning. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
So I took Christian Kirk with my first pick, and again, I need some wide receiver depth and maybe somebody to not run 17 yards downfield and catch bombs.
Yeah.
Like,
if you would have went like if he was there like Brian Thomas or something, I'd be like, all right, your floor might not be unbelievable wide receiver, but you're getting 13 catches per game from McCaffrey and Bijan anyway, so you'd probably be fine.
And I am going to go ahead and take Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk's former teammate, for another deep threat on this team of just enormous upside.
Gabe Davis is already in your queue, I imagine.
Yeah, well, we're only going 14 rounds today, so we won't be taking Gabe Davis, but we will be talking about round 7 right after this break.
Football action continues.
Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances?
As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North.
It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield.
Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
Now, in fairness to Joe Lynn, he put this in the comments before my last turn, but he says, I love Heath's team. I was skeptical on going 0 wide receiver through 4 rounds. I was feeling pretty skeptical about it at one point as well, Joe, and you're smart. You know how to get your chat read on the show. Start with, I love Heath's team. So I end up with no wide receivers in the first 4 rounds. My wide receiver room through 9 rounds, George Pickens, Mike Evans, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley. In a 2 wide receiver league, that's definitely going to play, right, Adam?
Yeah. And like we view Evans and George Pickens as these wide receivers that just run vertical routes, but like it's not like Madden where they're literally just running go routes like 80% of the time. Like it's higher than other wide receivers, and maybe it won't be for George Pickens this season in the new offense. So and And I think the balance, like I love the Christian Kirk selection. I mean, Christian Kirk was like wide receiver 22 or 23 on a per game basis before going down. And the thing I like about Kirk too, we don't really remember it because we didn't see it as much last season because he wasn't as healthy. You look back, Doug Peterson's first season there, before they had Calvin Ridley and everything, he was lining up in the backfield as much as any wide receiver in the NFL, getting matchups against linebackers. Like, he sees as many matchups against linebackers as any receiver in the league. Obviously, a lot of that because he plays in the slot, but a lot of it's also because he lines up in the backfield. I would not be surprised if we went back to that. And Calvin Ridley led the NFL in end zone targets last season with CeeDee Lamb. Like, Evan Ingram has not been a touchdown scorer throughout his career. I think Brian Thomas can be, but who's to say a lot of those end zone targets don't go to Christian Kirk's direction?
Yeah, I think there's somebody came at me actually on Twitter because we had talked about like wide receivers 21 through 30 or something in our rankings. And I think I had said that Kirk doesn't have top 12 upside. And he reminded me that like we've seen Christian Kirk. I'm going to call out Sam Wagman, the first person I had to reset the clock for in this draft, but he picked right after that. And he made a great pick. George Kittle at pick 105. I was hoping you were going to pair Kittle up with TJ Hawkinson and just own the tight end position.
I was.
Sam, you were. Sam took him one pick before you, but somebody said, we've seen Christian Kirk finish as a top 15 wide receiver, and that's true. Not quite on a per game basis, I don't think. So if Trevor Lawrence can post a touchdown rate like that's not in the Daniel Jones range, then we might see Christian Kirk score 8 to 10 touchdowns and legitimately finish as a top 12 wide receiver, which would be pretty awesome for my team. I said we were going to talk about round 7. Let's do that. We're already in round 9 in the draft, but in round 7, I started it off with Baker Mayfield, then Christian Watson, Bryce Young, Ramondre Stevenson, Jordan Addison. Rashee Rice goes one pick after Jordan Addison. Jackson Smith and Jigba goes one pick after Rashee Rice. Xavier Worthy, Jaden Reed, Terry McLaurin, Derrick Henry, and Will Levis. I like that Derrick Henry pick by Thomas Schaefer. It's somebody else that I was really considering at the next turn if I could get to him. So, Adam, I know that you're like trying to get your queue set and everything, but I think like maybe the most interesting run of the entire draft happened with the 5 wide receivers that were taken right before you drafted Terry McLaurin. We see Jordan Addison, Rashee Rice, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Xavier Worthy, and Jaden Reed. You could like legitimately convince me that a year from now, any of these 5 wide receivers are going to become like top 12, top 15 dynasty wide receivers. You could also convince me legitimately that any of these 5 wide receivers are not going to be ranked in the top 40. It just feels like just complete. Oh, and Thomas Schaefer at pick 110 takes Jamison Williams. Say, why take those guys at 80 when you can get that guy at 110? You're getting ready to make your pick, Adam. And after you do, I want you to kind of talk about that group of Addison, Rice, JSN, Worthy, and Reed. When I look at my dynasty wide receiver rankings, I think they're probably all pretty close as well. I've got Worthy at 26, JSN at 29, Addison at 30, Rice at 31, Reed at 33. Like that feels like the lottery ticket range of young wide receivers.
Yeah, so the reason I did end up going McLaurin is because I did like a lot of the receivers in that range. But like Terry McLaurin,
and it's funny because not to interrupt you, but
go for it.
Could he be like any more opposite of that group of wide receivers? Like I feel pretty confident Terry McLaurin's going to finish probably somewhere between wide receiver 20 and wide receiver 30.
Yeah, he's pretty much always been in between like wide receiver 23 and 30 in points per game. It's just the touchdowns. Like he's giving you 4 or 5 touchdowns max. And with what I expect Jaden Daniels to bring to that offense, he was the best deep ball passer in college last season. The pace is going to be massive. Like everybody in Washington's been talking about the pace of play. If he gets up to 7, let alone if he somehow has an outlier touchdown season, like, yeah, he could be like, if you watch every receiver in the NFL every year, like Terry McLaurin is on the field as a player better than like the wide receiver 30 in the NFL, in my opinion. It's just the opportunities have been just very inconsistent. He's had like 12 different quarterbacks.
So I haven't taken a running back since round 3. It's funny, nobody else wanted to take a running back before round 3. I took 2 of them, and then I've taken 4 wide receivers, a quarterback, and a tight end. I do think there's some pretty interesting running backs left. Tony Pollard was just taken by Rich Coolin, and I think great pick. Najee Harris is still there. Aaron Jones is still there. Javonte Williams is still there. Raheem Mostert, Zach Charbonnet, the younger guy, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, some of the older guys that, we're not too excited about. Are there any running backs out there right now that you think, man, that guy's just a steal?
Honestly, I do like Charbonnet a lot because he averaged almost 9 touches per game with Ken Walker healthy. So there's even if you had no options for a week as a flex, you could start him in a pinch and just get 8 to 10 touches probably. Then he averaged 20 per game when Walker was out. He was already the third down and pass catching running back. He played 80+% of their snaps in the 2-minute drill on third and long. So and this is a PPR format, and everything out of Seattle indicates they're probably going to throw more. So if they throw more, maybe that benefits Charbonnet. So I do like him. Honestly, Singletary is not bad at this point. I'm also the largest Singletary fan on the planet, so that'll help with that. But even Jerome Ford is probably going to give you 4 to 6 usable weeks this season. So and then I don't want to mention it, but I kind of want Jaleel McLaughlin as we were talking about Denver. But.
Yeah, I won't be taking Jaleel McLaughlin yet. I did take Zach Charbonnet. He was actually the top option on my board, and I'm going to go ahead and take Aaron Rodgers as well. So that will have Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, and Aaron Rodgers are my 3 quarterbacks, giving me a little bit of stability there. I add Charbonnet as my 3rd running back. I'm probably going to go ahead and take one more of those, but you don't need too much depth when you've got McCaffrey and Bijan. If they get hurt, you're probably sunk anyway. We are kind of approaching, the dart throw, go get your guys part of the draft if we're not already there. Let's go back a little bit and take a look at what happened in round 8. Geno Smith, Alvin Kamara, TJ Hawkinson were the first 3 picks of round 8. Then Joe Mixon, Brian Thomas, and Tyjae Spears. I like that Tyjae Spears pick by Adam Azer. I don't really get to say that about an Adam Azer pick. Keon Coleman, Cooper Kupp, and James Conner. Then Amari Cooper, DeAndre Swift, and Christian Kirk. Let's talk. So Spears goes here in round 8. We just saw Tony Pollard in round 10. That's kind of the opposite of what we're seeing in redraft. I have these 2 back-to-back in Dynasty. How do you view this Titans backfield for this year and for Dynasty?
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up because I've done a lot of stuff with Tony, articles and stuff about the backfield for Tennessee. And for redraft, Pollard goes, I think, a round earlier than Spears. Just give me Spears. A similar situation as Seattle, right? He is guaranteed to get more carries this season because they've already come out and said they view it as a 1A, 1B. And I think his pass, he caught 50 passes last year. I think he can catch similar volume of passes again because Tennessee is going to throw more too. And he was a 3rd down running back. Granted, it's a new scheme, a new system, but yeah, in Dynasty, they should be pretty close still. And a 2-round difference, that's the instance where normally I've been saying, okay, give me Spears at the discount. This time, yeah, I'll take Pollard for the 2-round discount in this scenario. But both were good picks.
Let's take a look at Adam Azer's team. We don't probably take a look at other people's teams enough during these mock drafts. And he is on the clock right now. He has Jaden Daniels, Deshaun Watson, and Drake May as his quarterbacks. So that's a pretty exciting trio. His running backs are Ken Walker, Tyjae Spears, Zach Moss. And at wide receiver, he has Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Stephon Diggs, and just took Rashid Shaheed at pick 127. There's no return yards in this league. It's funny. Adam picks Rashid Shaheed. Jacob Gibbs takes Daniel Jones 1 pick later, and Adam says, great pick, Jacob. I guess Adam already had 3 quarterbacks. He couldn't take his guy, Daniel Jones. I think he was just joking. What do you think about that receiver room of Chase, Neighbors, JSN, and Diggs? Diggs doesn't seem to fit.
Probably not, but I also he's such an interesting player because is he going to actually be there for one season, and then could we have him for the final couple seasons where he's a top 20-ish fantasy receiver all of a sudden getting back to that 30% target share because the highest target share a second wide receiver had during his time in Buffalo was like 17%. It was Cole Beasley. So like that's not the case anymore. But overall, I mean, yeah, he has probably 2 top 15 dynasty wide receivers at the very least.
He has 2 of my top 10, 2 of my
Right.
top 9 dynasty wide receivers. Yeah, I think if you asked Adam, he probably views this team as a for the future team, in which case you're hoping that former Bills, Zach Moss and Stephon Diggs are trade chips, I think, in the middle of the year that you can turn into something else, maybe even Ken Walker as well. Because if JSN takes a step forward this year and Neighbors gets a quarterback next year, then Chase, Neighbors, and JSN could be the most talented wide receiver trio. Could be my Bijan and McCaffrey at running back.
Yeah.
Adam still does not have a tight end, but with kind of a play for the future team, I don't care about that. I'm probably only going to draft one at this point if they make me, unless there's a young one that I'd really like to get my hands on. You just made your round 11 pick and you took Aaron Jones. So you've got Saquon, Cook, and Aaron Jones. Seems like a very win now running back room.
Yeah, and at that point I was like, it just felt like my team is good enough to have the flexibility of, if I take Aaron Jones, I think I can make a run and compete potentially. But if I don't, whatever, it's the 11th round. At that point, Aaron Jones obviously pushing 30, multiple hamstring issues last year, but when he was healthy on the stretch, he was once again one of the most efficient players at the position. So I'm fine with him there. Really, really wanted, and I also debated honestly because if Jones went before me, I was probably going to try to double dip the Pittsburgh quarterbacks that were both there, but they both go off the board. I still don't have my quarterback 3. At this point, I might just wait and say, okay, I'll just take Jacoby Brissett or whoever's left. I'm not super worried about quarterback 3 at this point. There were multiple times in the draft where I wanted Will Levis. I actually did want Daniel Jones. They went right before me, so that's kind of why I pushed quarterback 3 down the board. I should probably just have zero fun and select Derek Carr here, and that's probably what I'm going to do, just to get somebody that's going to start the whole season.
It is very much not fun. I'm going to read off my roster here and kind of ask your opinion on a problem that's coming up for me. Then we'll read off your roster, and then we're gonna finish this podcast up. We're already in round 12. I will remind people, go to cbssports.com by tomorrow morning, definitely by tomorrow afternoon. We'll have a full breakdown of this draft. You'll be able to see all the picks. You'll be able to see everyone's teams. So I know it's hard to keep up with this if you're not watching with the board and you're just listening. Also, come watch us on YouTube. It's on the Fantasy Football Today page on YouTube. It's lots of fun. We're fun to look at. So I've got Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, and Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, Adam. My running backs are Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, and Zach Charbonnet. My wide receivers, George Pickens, Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk. At tight end, I have Mark Andrews. I've got 3 picks left in the way we're doing this draft. Kind of a shallow format for a dynasty draft, but wanted to get most of the draft in on the show. Do you ever, I know I'm clearly a win now squad, and there's some guys out there like Raheem Mostert probably makes sense for a win now roster. There's some older players that I wouldn't normally get too excited about quite yet in dynasty. Do you lean into that, or is it okay to hedge a little bit and maybe take 1 or 2 younger guys just in case everything goes sideways?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely okay. Because you mentioned, you mentioned the one team you alluded to at the start of the episode where you looked like a lock to win, and you had the 3rd overall selection, and then you probably on that team you would have maybe wished you had a couple pieces that were young that you could feel like you could build around. So I don't think in dynasty formats, especially at this point of the draft, it's ever a bad idea to just take shots on some young players. On my team, I'm not even I'm okay. I'm a fan of what I think the Carolina offense will do, but I took Xavier Legette over some established players just because high draft capital, talented player. We'll see what happens.
What about double tapping Dolphins running backs? We've got Raheem Mostert at the end of round 12. We've got Jalen Wright at the start of round 13. I don't know who my flex is going to be, but he's going to be
pretty much
awesome.
checked off every box with that. You got an established veteran, but then you also got a young player, but you also hedged, right? If Mostert doesn't work out, what have been the only reasons Raheem Mostert hasn't worked out in his career? He's been hurt.
He got hurt.
And if that happens, Jalen Wright is not if Raheem Mostert gets hurt, Devon Achane's not getting 25 touches per game. We know that. So I actually think that was a very. I don't want to give you any more credit than you already need, but I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
You head into your last two picks with Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams, and Derek Carr at quarterback. I think Derek Carr's a good pick there. Like, you already had so much excitement in that quarterback room. You need somebody to like tell everybody to go to bed, turn the lights off, go to bed. Derek Carr will do that for you. Saquon Barkley, James Cook, and Aaron Jones are your running backs. Your wide receivers, Devontae Smith, Tank Dell, Terry McLaurin, and Xavier Legette. And then at tight end, you paired up TJ Hawkinson with Evan Ingram, which I think is a fantastic job there. How do you feel about this team? You walk away feeling pretty good. What's your focus on these last two picks?
Yeah, I like it. There were a couple times where I was looking at certain wide receivers and, fantasy drafts happened and the players that I wanted went before me. But I think I did a pretty good job adjusting. I'm glad I ended up going with TJ Hawkinson. I was kind of on the fence about it, but I think in a dynasty format where I got him, I think it was like round 8, round 9. I think that was really good. And yeah, to be able to get somebody I think is going to be not only a must-start tight end for the weeks he's out, but somebody that's going to give you a high floor and have, a really, really safe floor as well. For my last couple selections, I'm probably going to just take players I think have opportunities, players that are in good offenses, players that are young, whatever stands out to me. There are a couple players that I'm looking at right now. So
you were looking at Jaleel McLaughlin, and Jamie just took him.
Yep.
So you're not going to get him. Adam, thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for being. I want to thank everybody who took part in the mock draft. Like, we're 51 minutes in and we're at pick 152. You guys did a fantastic job today. Thanks as always to producer Harry and to everybody who was active in the YouTube chat. As always, we will talk to you next Tuesday.